giant global political figure, the man that would be the political leader for 500 million people, the man that would represent all of us on the world stage, the man whose job was so important that of course you're paid more than President Obama. Well, I'm afraid what we got was you. And I'm sorry, but after that performance earlier that you gave, and I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense, though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous, and I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. Well, good morning, Mr. Schulz. President Schulz, I know it's my job to congratulate you, but given that we knew this result 2.5 years ago as a result of a stitch-up, there really doesn't seem to be much point. I mean, after all, nobody in Europe would ever, modern-day Europe, would ever have a big, powerful job that was decided by a full, open process. I'm sure Mr. Barroso would agree. Or are we going to get the Martin Schulz we've got to know since 2004 as leader of the Socialist Group? You know the one I mean. Snarling, angry, unable to control his temper, intolerant of anybody with an alternative point of view, somebody who is contemptuous when in free referendums people have the temerity to vote no, somebody who is anti-British to his fingertips and doesn't like free markets. I was wondering which one would we get. Well, your opening speech has settled that question for me, and it's pretty clear. We're going to have 2.5 years of political fanaticism from the chair. We think firing 1,000 cruise missiles in is likely to make an unstable situation even worse than it is now. But at least, Mr Verhofstadt, there is a chance of peace. And I know that you represent the kind of political class who believe that global influence can only be achieved through bombing. Well, luckily, unlike extreme EU nationalists like yourself, British democracy has proved that through nation-state parliaments, we've actually made people rethink. And Mr. Chairman, I have to say, Mr. Chairman, that as somebody that has been here now for 14 years, it's very ironic that the view that I used to represent was called extreme, but you can see the extreme militarists now. Thank you. We went to war in Iraq being told that Saddam had weapons of... Why don't you shut up and listen for a change? You really must be the vilest, rudest man in European politics. And you rant on, and the chair lets you get away with it because you're the former Prime Minister of Belgium. Well, there we are. So, Mr. Tannock, I understand what you're saying. I understand something ghastly has happened here, but before you take military action, you need to be certain you're going to make things better and not worse.
The time is over.
That the north and south of Europe would converge, that we'd all start to love each other, that we'd all begin to feel a European identity, that we'd all begin to show allegiance to the flag and the anthem. Those of us, of course, that criticise this were told that we were extremists and we lacked vision. Well, one vision we didn't lack is we understood that the countries of Europe are different, and that if you try and force together different people or different economies without first seeking the consent of those people, it is unlikely to work. And the plan has failed. This isn't just Greece we're talking about today. The whole of the Mediterranean now finds itself in the wrong currency. and yet virtually nobody in the political arena has got the courage to stand up and say that. Indeed, I feel that the continent is now divided from north to south. There is a new Berlin Wall, and it's called the euro. And the old enmities have been resumed. Just listen to the way that the German leader of the Christian Democrat group this morning attacked Mr. Spiras. I think it was absolutely disgusting, but it shows the way North and South now feel about each other. I've been wondering why David Cameron's been slashing our armed forces, won't commit to 2%, is happy for us not to be able to defend our islands. I think Mr Juncker's given us the answer. We're going to do it at an EU level. We're going to have a European army. Now, when I raised this last year with the Deputy Prime Minister, Liberal Democrat Nick Clegg, he said it was a dangerous fantasy to even talk about an EU army. I hope every Liberal Democrat voter has heard Mr Verhofstadt today, the leader of the European Liberals, crying out for militarisation at an EU level. We're here in what I've been told repeatedly is the home of European democracy, and so surely we could have taken the opportunity this morning to celebrate the Dutch referendum last week, in which the people said no to EU enlargement, no to the deal with the Ukraine, and no doubt had it been Turkey, an even bigger number of people would have said no to Turkish accession. So it was a victory for democracy, but in particular it was a victory for a little organisation called Genpile, a group of young bloggers who managed to get together 427,000 signatures. We were told by Mr Juncker that if the Dutch voted no, it would be a disaster. But he hasn't mentioned it today at all. And indeed, your predecessor, Mr Van Rompuy, my old mate, says we should just ignore the Dutch and carry on blithely. I thought, crikey, perhaps Blair's going to do it. Perhaps he really is going to reform and change. But no, under your presidency, there have been 3,350 new legislative acts. Total failure on economic reform. On the CAP, you said you'd work to achieve a consensus for reform. Well, in a way you have, I suppose, because you've got 24 countries against you. No CAP reform until 2014. On the budget, you said there'd be no surrender of the UK rebate. Well, it seems to me that you've given away £7 billion of British taxpayers' money for nothing in return. Your only achievement is to open talks with Turkey, which is opposed by the vast majority of people in Europe and will lead to an even higher bill. Why should we pay a penny piece into an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 11 years in a row? This budget deal is game, set and match to President Chirac. No cheese-eating surrender monkey he. Unlike you, he stands up for the French national interest, not some bizarre notion of Europe, and he has outclassed and outplayed you at every turn. It's been said before. Hang on a second. Everybody else gets an extra minute, Mr. President. I'm asking for 10 seconds. Thank you. Which is why, Prime Minister, I urge you. It's often been said that you wanted to be the permanent President of Europe. Please stay on for a further 6 months, 6 more months of the British presidency, and they'll kick us out. Thank you. And then we came to New Year's Eve. Munich. The train station, the main station, closed down because of a terrorist threat, the intelligence coming from Syria and Iraq. The very same train station that in September people had stood at, holding up their placards, refugees welcome. That irony was not lost on me. But it's what happened, I think, in Cologne, where we saw the mob. Up to 1,000 young males in the street sexually assaulting and harassing women. It is, I think, in many ways one of the most disgraceful public order events that we've seen in modern day Europe. And yet there was an attempt by the police and the press to cover it all up, and even the suggestion from some German politicians that German young women should change their dress and their mode of behaviour in the street, which I thought was a total insult. There's even a name for these assaults. A name for these assaults in Egypt, because they've now become commonplace and part of everyday life. And we ought to have the courage to send out a message to say these assaults must never be acceptable in any European town or city, and we'll do our damnedest to make sure that it never happens again. because you were quoting Winston Churchill at us this morning, as indeed Mr Verhofstadt backed you up. You're quite right. Post-war, Churchill did encourage integration, especially between France and Germany, but made it absolutely clear at all times that the United Kingdom should not be a part of it, and I would like you please to acknowledge that.